Hi folks, welcome to day 2 of the Week of the Moderns. Should be putting this out on the Monday as well as the first one, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, this is set for the Wednesday. What I would say is that between 10:30 and 12 o'clock on Wednesday, as with all Wednesdays up to the end of the semester, I am available to chat. Hello, how are you? See what's going on, check up on what's going well for you and what's going bad for you. Please do not be shy to join in. Next week, I think we're going to be doing video the first day and more Zoom conference the second day to, figure out what we're going to, a little bit more about contemporary theatre. That's next week. I will be sending out on Friday, maybe, some details about what we're doing next week, if there isn't stuff already in this email. I think there might be. I know I have to make the video for it yet because I'm doing these sequentially, because that would be weird otherwise. Anyway, how are you? Okay, pause it if you haven't finished and keep telling me. I swear I'm listening. And now we continue. Right, so we're talking about the moderns. We're talking about theatre as it has evolved from those guys we were talking about earlier in the week. And we started the week with talking about, if you will, the founders of modern theatre. And we talked about it largely from a European perspective. Because, like it or not, the vast majority of influence on the theatre of the United States, regardless of background, with the possible exception of Chinese theatre, but that's a whole other matter, most of it comes from a European point of view originally. Back in the late 19th century, if you wanted to be a successful actor in the United States, the first thing you needed to do was be born in Europe or have a really European name. Prior to the advent of the movies, it wasn't really like it is now. It was very much local theatres waiting for somebody famous to come along. So, for instance, if you go down to Schimpf's, or is it Muth's? I can't remember. Muth's candy store in Nulu on Market. You can get a bonbon to this day called the Modjeska. Modjeska is named for Elena Modjeska, who was a Polish actress of great repute, but she came over to the United States and she was the hottest thing in the country. She toured the country back and forth. She performed the first ever production of A Doll's House under that name in this country. Yes, that's your man Ibsen from The Last Day. And she was everything. People came from all around to see her perform. She came to Louisville many times. And that was the way. There were plenty of local performers, but the stars back then all came from Europe. Now, the funny thing is, with the advent of the movie, it went in reverse. Because of American movies going everywhere, the stars then were the ones who came to Europe from the United States. Paul Robeson's a great example. Al Jolson's another one of these massive American stars who were huge in Europe because of movies. Now, we talked about Ibsen, Chekhov, and Strindberg as writers, and we talked about a guy called Stanislavski. This is all very European. We're going to move the focus very much to the United States. We're first going to start talking about method acting. After we talk about method acting for a little bit, I'm then going to start talking in a little bit more depth about some of the American writers who continue to develop the movements of realist and naturalistic theatre. Now, there's a whole other bracket that I'll be talking about next week when we're talking about contemporary stuff. But these are some of the best examples of modern American writing. And, because we had all white European blokes the last day, let's have a mix of African American writers and authors today, after we get past the method stuff. It's going to be a lot of videos interspersed in today's video, so you don't even have to leave the video in order to see some of the videos. But I'm going to give a couple of recommendations of videos you could check out, and you can pick and choose. And, the other thing about today that you need to know, today's treasure hunt, it's just the 2 things you're looking for, unless I think of a third. But it's just the 2. Again, pop them into on a postcard. Pop them in the email to me, and then what I can do is when you hit them, I'll know that you're here, and there's a bonus point for, it being the second class of the week. First up, though, I'm afraid we are going to go back and we're going to continue to look a little bit at method acting. I'm going to give you the basics first, and then we're going to have a look at a clip of a method acting exercise. Okay? So, method acting is probably the most commonly practiced theatre method or theatre technique in the United States by a long way. Partly because it's the first one to really take off internationally that was developed in the United States. And we are very fond in this country of doing our own thing, regardless of whether everybody else in the world does something better, and we don't bother to try and catch up with it. Football, soccer. But it's also uniquely placed to suit very well modern televisual and cinematic needs. On a stage, you put out your voice to people all over. You have to reach every corner. In the movies, you got speakers to do that. So it allowed for a lot more personal interior work that can be done on the face and in the voice, rather than being able to project everywhere. So here's the basics on it. It comes from the earlier ideas of Konstantin Stanislavski. They're not so interested in the physical method, which is ironic because they call it method. And this makes things very confusing for lots of people. Don't worry, not on an exam. In the 1930s, poor translations of Stanislavski, allied to some people coming across from Russia, escaping Soviet rule, led to the foundation of the beginnings of method. Lee Strasberg is one of many people who are very involved in this. I focus on him because he's the one who started making money out of talking about it, but other people have taken it, adapted it, and made it, in my opinion, better than Strasberg's angle. Strasberg would not survive Me Too today. We'll leave it at that. 1947, the Actors Studio set up as a membership organization. The idea was it was teaching method. Strasberg had brought his ideas to a certain point and he felt, yes, this is enough to create a formal teaching structure based largely on Stanislavski. The major teachers there were Strasberg himself and Stella Adler and Sanford Meisner. Adler and Meisner have become basically the go-to people in terms of method acting for most of the latter part and the first part of this century, but Strasberg remains incredibly important. The Actors Studio, which he set up with them, is where they used to have from the Actors Studio, the bit where they interview actors the whole time. Many branches of thought on it developed over the years, i.e. Stella Adler didn't like some of the things that Strasberg did. Meisner didn't like some of the ideas. And there are now several branches. I would say there's probably about 4 major schools of thought as regards method. Some of them go much closer to Stanislavski, some go much further from it. Ultimately, the idea is the idea of creating the emotion is to be portrayed is something that comes from your experience, from you. It's a very internal thing. With Strasberg, you imagine yourself somewhere else. With method, you are the person playing the part. Popular thanks to its success in film. We'll have a look at some of the techniques. I'm not a big fan of method. I'm going to say that now. I think it has its place, but I also see it as being derivative without necessarily always being additive. Some method branches I am a big fan of. But the basics that kind of underpin all of method is you need to understand Stanislavski, particularly his earlier works, the likes of, the magic if, objective, and motive. These are, if you like, the mortar that holds the bricks of method together. This is how you develop, this is where you start from to develop your character. And developing the backstory is important. You need to kind of create an idea of where they're coming from, what is influencing their decision. And a lot of that is reverse engineering what you're reading in different ways. You need to connect to the character personally and truthfully. How am I like this part that I'm playing? How do I feel I would be in that situation? What is honestly my likely reaction? Practice and application of the character really is a case of put your character in different scenarios. Become more and more familiar with how your character behaves. If your character is the kind of person who tries to avoid answering a question, practice that. Practice that in a different scenario. What if you're at a dinner party? What if you're at a job interview? And go through the method of applying that. Now, the fifth one, I like 5. It's listed according to some people as being 4, and that reflecting deeply is a major part of the practice and application. But really, I think it's a separate thing. You do need to spend hours, if you're going to apply this, examining and considering and thinking on who the character is. Theoretically, if you're method acting well, you're not really acting, you're just reacting. You're just being the person in the moment. There's a big argument about what is acting and what isn't. Famously, there's a story that used to be told that Dustin Hoffman, on making the film Marathon Man, with Laurence Olivier, the famous English actor, came in looking rough one day. And according to the story, he had been staying out all night and, treating himself poorly and not looking after himself in order to better get into the character he was playing in the film. To which Laurence Olivier, the great Shakespearean actor, simply responded with, "Why don't you simply act it, dear boy?" Now, that's apocryphal. Dustin Hoffman had been going through a bad divorce and was very anxious about the thing, so he was staying up, but not in preparation for the character. The reality is, we have an idea of what method acting is. Daniel Day-Lewis is, for many people, the epitome of modern method acting in the sense that if he's going to play a boxer, like Robert De Niro before him, he's going to become a boxer. And he did when he filmed The Boxer. I know it's not really imaginatively titled movie. If he's going to become play the character of a butcher, as he did in Gangs of New York, a 19th century butcher, he learned the skills of a 19th century butcher. But this isn't to say that Daniel Day-Lewis exclusively does everything that somebody would have done. Learning how and who these characters are does get rewarded by knowing intimately how things were. But, if you're playing a murderer, a serial killer, that it doesn't suggest go out and become a serial killer. Try and figure out what's the background of the serial killer. I was going to say he, and I should say he, because almost all serial killers are men. I don't know of female ones. But, what led them to this point? What was their childhood like? What was their what was it that led them to make the first kill? What do they feel when they do that? The difference between this and Stanislavski is, in Stanislavski's case, you're going, if I were a serial killer, how would I feel? As opposed to trying to understand where that feeling comes from. The other thing is, Stanislavski would suggest that a lot of the work for becoming that serial killer is physical. How does it feel to hold the knife? When you're holding the knife and when you draw back, how does that impact on you physically? What emotions does that bring up? So there's a bit of the difference. Let's have a look at some famous method actors. Have a look at these names. You'll recognize one or two. It's like a who's who of the great actors of our age. And you'll get people from all over and all walks of life. Again, it's a very limited list because it goes on. But it's a limited list because not just in who it lists. It's also a limited list in that this lists people who have done method acting training. It isn't an exhaustive list of all the people or of all the training those people have had. Some of these actors are also very well versed, obviously, in Stanislavski, but some have expertise in, say, No theatre or the school of thought of Jacques Lecoq. Various different styles of theatre are and particularly of acting, are learned. Now, if you just want to do movies, shoot, go for it. Just do method. But that's going to leave you limited as an actor. The more different styles and approaches you can bring in, the more interesting you are as an actor to a director, because you can reach something else. Method will get you to a lot of places, but if you're playing, again, I'll pick a serial killer, you aren't gonna get everywhere with that. There's got to be something of the imagination. There's also got to be something of the physical. Now, I will talk about a famous method actor called Gary Cooper, who was in cowboy movies years ago. I think it was, I can't remember what the name of the movie was, My Darling Clementine or something like that. One of his early cowboy movies. The director was used to working with stage actors. So he sets up the scene and he has Gary Cooper sit there about this close to the screen for this one shot. And the director back in those days would be sitting about 5 to 10 yards behind, and he'd shout action, and the actor would do his thing. And in the case of Gary Cooper, he'd deliver the line. Deliver it very simply, very subtly, and the director would say, cut. Okay, let's try that again. He tried for about 15 takes to get Gary Cooper to give him what he felt he needed, sitting 10 meters behind, 10 yards behind. The following day, the film went off to get developed. The day after, they get back the rushes. It's a very different system these days because it's so fast with digital. But he gets back the tape, and this supposedly non-existent performance that he could see from 10 yards back. When it was close up, the whole of Gary Cooper's face, he could see everything that he wanted to see on his face. And that's Gary Cooper, being able to emote and create, using method, using Stanislavski, and using whatever he picked up along the way. An actor who only has one tool can't do very much. Now, let's have a little look at a clip from the internet, off YouTube that I've borrowed. It's somebody talking us through one of those method acting exercises, probably one of the first ones that you're going to come across when you come in, which is literally drinking a cup of tea. Those of you who want to join in, pause this now, go get yourself no, wait till I've finished talking. Pause it then, get yourself a cup of tea, or I suppose because we're here, a cup of coffee, bring it in, maybe a cup of water, it doesn't really matter, and follow through with the exercise. It's only about 2.5 minutes long. I'll see you at the other side of that.
This basic method acting exercise for beginning actors will help you with concentration and teach you how you can use your senses to create imaginary objects and experiences on stage. First, you want to have a nice warm cup of coffee at the ready and make sure it's not too hot. If you don't like coffee, you can use tea, soda, juice, or any other beverage. Make sure you're comfortably seated in a chair and fully relaxed before you start the exercise. Now, look at the cup. How big is it? Is it tall or wide? How much space does it take? What color is it? Is anything written or drawn on the cup? Are there any marks or scratches on it? Now pick up the cup and begin exploring it. First, feel the cup. How heavy is it in your hands? Can you assess the weight of it? Notice which of your muscles are engaged to hold the cup. Notice how you're holding the cup. Try to hold it different ways, exploring how it feels every time. Run your fingers along the cup and notice its texture. Is it made of fine china? Styrofoam? Can you feel grooves or imperfections? Now notice how warm your hands feel. Are your fingers tingling from the heat? How much cooler is the handle than the rest of the cup? Bring the cup closer to your face and explore the warmth of the steaming coffee on your face. How does the coffee smell? Freshly roasted? Slightly burnt? Nutty? Take a sip. What sound does the liquid make? Take another sip. How does the coffee taste? Is it bitter? Sweet? Strong? Explore how your body feels as you swallow the warm coffee. Continue exploring the coffee cup through all 5 of your senses for as long as you want. Then put the cup down and try to recall the sensations you had while you hold an imaginary coffee cup. Go back and forth between the real coffee cup and the imaginary coffee cup to help you recreate each sensation.
So maybe it might seem a little bit weird, but this is what you do when you learn to be an actor. You have to engage with what's around you. You need to have a deep-seated appreciation of your surrounds. I mean, we do this in real life. We used to do this when we were children. It's similar with Stanislavski. There's a lot of... I was toying with showing you like a quick video of a series of exercises, but I also am very aware that until you're brought into it, it can sometimes seem a little bit weird. My experience generally suggests that ultimately, if you see something without context, it seems stranger than if you're walked into it. The whole idea of actors being trees, now let's stick our feet in the earth and become trees, that isn't something that happens the very first minute you walk in there. There's a whole lot of discussion and talk and thinking that goes into why do we do this particular exercise. And some of these are silly, fun games, and some of them are very deep, meaningful approaches to how we get at what we need to do. At the end of the day, it is very much a case of trying to access who we are in the same way that we did when we were 4 or 5 years old. If we are to figure out who we are as though we are working from scratch, it is easier in some ways to go back to scratch and to get past our sophistication and our supposed adult mores. Right, let's move on from the acting side of things and let's start talking a little bit about Lorraine Hansberry. We're going to look at Lorraine Hansberry, August Wilson and Lynn Nottage, and I've got a little bit of a clip about all of them to talk about in different ways. Lorraine Hansberry I pick on first because, well, she is in so many ways, she's not the first American writer of the 20th century, nor is she the first female writer of the 20th century, the first African-American female writer or anything like that. But she is the one who made it big first and made it very big. And it didn't come from nowhere. You'll find generally, particularly in the postmodern era, or sorry, the era after we achieved modernism, that you can have success, but to have critical success and enduring success, you need to be coming from somewhere. You need to be bringing something to it. There's plenty of people who can be craftsmen in writing of plays, and some people who can straddle between craft and art. The artists are craftsmen already. They're very capable at sculpting language and sculpting, manipulating words and ideas and images to reach us. They have something to say, and Lorraine Hansberry is very much an artist in that vein. She has an awful lot to say. I'm going to play this clip now of her, it's really an advertisement for a biography thing on PBS about her. It touches on an awfully large number of the different passions, aspects of her. So have a look at this clip now.
Serious drama that has at least the objective of making a larger statement about life, I think sooner or later has to become involved in its time.
Lorraine Hansberry is hugely important for having written A Raisin in the Sun, the most celebrated play by an African-American author, considered one of the great plays of the 20th century.
I'm looking in the mirror this morning and I'm thinking I'm 35 years old, I'm married 11 years, and I got a boy who's got to sleep in the living room because I got nothing, hey? Nothing to give him but stories.
She was reaching into the essence of who we were, who we are, where we came from.
It isn't as if we got up today and said, you know, what can we do to irritate America?
Lorraine was a very political person. Her plays, that to me is her jumping off place.
She's fighting the oppression of women. She's fighting against race discrimination, poverty, class.
Lorraine wasn't just a conventional mainstream liberal. Lorraine was a left-wing radical.
It really doesn't matter whether you're talking about the oppressed or the oppressor. An oppressive society will dehumanize and degenerate everyone involved.
Among all the women I knew, she was the most exciting.
As a middle-class Black woman, Hansberry was supposed to live a conventional life. And certainly in her early years in New York, she was not living a conventional life.
She's living this kind of parallel life and writing about it.
Lorraine became like part of my consciousness. She seemed to know something about everything. She was a profound thinker.
Lorraine was this new moment on the horizon. She set a whole new paradigm, a whole new stage for what we could now begin to expect of America and what we could begin to expect of ourselves.
So there you get some idea of Lorraine Hansberry. She was a remarkable woman. People are writing books still, trying to figure out who and what she was. She's been claimed by so many different sides. She's a feminist. She's a race activist. She's sort of exploring sexual identities and so many different things. She's not easily pinned down. If you're to say she's the Black playwright, you're doing her a disservice any more than to say that she's the American playwright. She, like the other two I mentioned later, transcends in the same way that Ibsen and Strindberg and Chekhov and what's his name, Shakespeare, that fella, and the Greeks. The best writers, given the opportunity, can transcend where they are, even in what they're talking about. So as we, if we look back at the play that we studied, A Raisin in the Sun, again, as the video says, if you only know her for that, you don't know her at all. But it does speak a lot. It speaks, number one, of where she comes from. She's not like Ibsen or Strindberg in that she didn't grow up incredibly poor. She grew up middle class. Her family did struggle greatly in order to get out of where they were and move up in the world. But she grew up middle class, so she has a very different perspective in some senses. There's not the same anxiousness in some senses. She's got more comfort. You can listening to her speak. She's got a voice that passes, which probably helped her greatly. Unfortunately, America is still bad in that regard. But for that voice that can pass, she also speaks very much with a truth of experience and a truth of understanding. You know, being a woman, you're immediately in a minority despite being the majority numbers, and so on and so forth. And she was very much an advocate, an activist. Yeah, arguably, she was even more of an activist than she was a writer. And having died so young, at the age of 34, I think, we didn't even begin to touch on what her potential was. But she was driven on by her activism. She was driven on with a great need to speak and to say something and to push the boundaries, push the barriers of what it was to be a woman in this time, what it was to be an African American at this time. She was a recorder of time, but an advocate for change. In that, you could argue that she is very much along the lines of Ibsen and many other playwrights. He just happens to be one that comes to mind. But yeah, compared to Shakespeare, she has something to do. Shakespeare just is there to entertain us. She wants to talk to us. She wants to talk to us about how we can be better as people, as a culture, as a society, as a nation, as a world. She's got a lot of things to say, and she doesn't have very long to say them. she's chosen theatre on this occasion to say that, and in many ways has demonstrated how it can be a force for change. And that, I think, is an important thing. And we'll come back to that in a little bit of time. Have a look now at this bit from August Wilson. This time we're going to change the dynamic. We're going back more to the theatrical side. These are two clips of two different productions of the same play, Fences. The first one is, I think it may be the original production. This is a special one done for the Tonys or something like that, for an award show, with James Earl Jones playing the lead role of Troy. The second one is the exact same scene, only with Denzel Washington. And here's where our treasure hunt number 2 comes in. Tell me which one of these two performances you would have liked to have seen more. Which production would you be more interested in? Please disregard the fact that it's old-looking television. Have a look at it and see which one appeals to you more.
Can I ask you a question?
What the hell you want to ask me? Mr. Stawicki is the one you got the questions for.
How come you ain't never liked me?
Liked you? Who in the hell ever said, I got to like you? What law is there to say, I got to like you? Do you want to stand up in my face and ask me some damn fool-ass question like that? Talking about liking somebody. Come here, boy, when I talk to you. Straighten up, goddammit. Ask you a question. What law is there to say, I got to like you?
None.
All right, then. Don't you eat every day? Answer me when I talk to you. Don't you eat every day?
Yeah.
Nigga, as long as you living in my house, you put a sir on the end of it when you talk to me.
Yes, sir.
You eat every day.
Yes, sir.
Got a roof over your head.
Yes, sir.
And clothes on your back.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think that is?
Because of you.
Hell, I know it's because of me. Why do you think that is?
Because you like me.
Like you. I go out of here every morning and bust my butt putting up with them crackers all day long because I like you. You is the biggest fool I ever saw. It is my job. It is my responsibility. You understand that? A man got to take care of his family. You live in my house. You sleep your behind on my bedclothes. You put my food in your belly because you are my son. You are my flesh and blood, not because I like you. It is my duty to take care of you. I owe a responsibility to you. Wait now. Let's get this straight right now. We'll go along any further. I ain't got to like you. Mr. Rand, don't give me my money come payday because he liked me. He give me because he owe me. Now, I didn't give you everything I had to give you. I gave you your life. Your mama and me worked it out between us. And liking your black ass was not a part of the bargain, and don't you try and go through life worried if somebody like you or not. You best make sure that they are doing right by you. You understand what I'm saying, boy?
Yes, sir.
Then you get the hell out of my face and go on down under A&P.
Can I ask you a question? The hell you got to ask me? Mr. Stawicki, the one you got the questions for. How come you ain't never liked me? Like you? Who the hell said I got to like you? What law is there say I got to like you? Want to stand up in my face and ask a damn fool-ass question like that, talking about liking somebody. Come here when I'm talking to you. Straighten up, goddammit. I asked you a question. What law is there to say I got to like you? None. Well, all right then. Don't you eat every day? Answer me when I talk to you. Don't you eat every day? Yeah. Nigga, as long as you in my house, you put a sir on the end of it when you talk to me. Yes, sir. You eat every day. Yes, sir. Got a roof over your head. Yes, sir. Got clothes on your back. Yes, sir. Why you think that is? Because of you. Hell, I know it's because of me, but why you think that is?
Because you like me.
Like, I go out of here every morning, bust my butt, putting up with them crackers every day, because I like you. You about the biggest fool I ever saw. It's my job. It's my responsibility. You understand that? A man is supposed to take care of his family. You live in my house, sleep your behind on my bedclothes, fill your belly with my food because you my son. You my flesh and blood. Not because I like you. Because it's my duty to take care of you. I owe a responsibility to you. Let's get this straight right here before I get along any further. I ain't got to like you. Mr. Rand don't give me my money come payday because he like me. He give it to me because he owe me. I don't give you everything I got to give you. I give you your life. Me and your mama worked that out between us, and liking your black ass wasn't part of the bargain. Now don't you try and go through life worrying about whether somebody like you or not. You best be making sure they doing right by you. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Then get the hell out of my face and get on down there.
Those are two marvelous performances, and as you can imagine, in different ways they have set the dialogue about what this play is. And this play is Fences, 1985's play by August Wilson, set in the 1950s, early 60s. So 30 years forward in setting from A Raisin in the Sun, and 30 years forward in writing from Wilson. So we have an interesting thing that's going on with this play. This is a play that is part of a bigger, broader picture. Let me tell you a bit about August Wilson first. He was born in Pittsburgh, as many people are, and as many people do, he eventually escaped. So, he was born originally as Frederick August Kittle Jr. His father was a German immigrant who was a baker, and his mom was African American and from North Carolina. He basically when his father died, he renamed himself Wilson for his mother. Her name was Daisy Wilson, in her honor. And as you can imagine, growing up with mixed parentage in the 1940s and 50s, he was born in 1945, he had a very strong idea of identity. Identity was a thing that was permanently a part of the discussion in his plays and in himself. Growing up in Pennsylvania, I think he moved on in sometime like 1968 or a little bit later perhaps. But the important thing to know is he was already setting up theaters there. He clearly was designed to be a writer. After leaving Pittsburgh, he moved on to he moved on first to St. Paul in Minnesota, where they really took him on board as being one of their own, and then eventually on to Seattle, where it was, I think, that he died. He was heavily influenced by civil rights marches and movements. He was particularly inspired by Malcolm X, and if you look through his work, it is an effort to catalogue the history of an African American century in the 20th century. He started, he wrote 10 or 12, let me get this up, his cycle. Yes, his 10 plays, known as the Pittsburgh cycle. The most famous of them are probably Fences, The Piano Lesson, and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. But like I said, there's 10 of them. You'll see a list of them on the side here, on one side or other of me, as I get to putting this up on screen, or get to editing this. He set out, for want of a better term, to catalogue an American history. He basically started writing them in, I think, 1982. The first one was Jitney. And he wrote pretty much one a year or one every other year for about 5 years, and then there were longer breaks between them before finishing off in 2005. And while they weren't written necessarily in order, and I don't know at what point did he realize this is what I'm doing, he's catalogued pretty much every decade of the 20th century, which is no mean feat. In this, he reminds me in some senses of Toni Morrison, another person of colour, and she catalogued in novels a way of life that wasn't appearing in the mainstream media, or for that matter, really in novels when she was starting to write them. He won a ton of stuff. He won the Pulitzer Prize twice. He won the Whiting Award, the Heinz Award. He won Tony, I think 3 Tonys. He won Critics' Circle Awards. Anything and everything that was to be had. He wrote, I think, about 15 plays in total over the years. And he has become, for want of a better term, the playwright laureate of African American theatre. He is the man who conjured a body of work more so than any one particular writer or another. And this is not to say there are not several dozen writers over the century, over the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, who have contributed massively to a body of work. But in terms of a modernist style of writing, in terms of something that is in keeping with the American theatrical landscape, more so than any other non-white writer, he has created a catalogue or a canon of works. So I'm going to leave the bit of talking about August Wilson with this video here. It's actually a radio recording, so sorry. So you can rest your eyes for a moment or two. It's about 5 minutes long, but it will give you a strong idea of who he is. He's talking about the Pittsburgh cycle, those 10 great plays. And it's interesting to hear him. He's talking about this in 1996, so he'd still to write about 3 of them. I think 3 of them still had to be written. But listen in. His words of wisdom on this give you an idea both of what it is to be a playwright and to be a playwright of colour, and to be trying to create a body of work. Enjoy.
I don't know when you envisioned the decade structure, if that was your original intention or if it just started happening that way, because you haven't written them in order necessarily. Did you find that was, looking back now, did you find that was the best way to do it, not in order, not having people expect to see that the 60s come after the 50s, after the 40s, you know, but to give them different...
See, I try when not having people expect. I try not, those people don't exist.
Yes.
See, because if you start on what people expect and you start with their expectations, then you start writing, you're allowing something else.
Sure.
I try to disregard all of that. I don't write, as an example, I don't write for any particular audience or anything other than working as an artist and trying to just get it down on a page.
Mm-hmm.
I started, I wrote a play called Jenny, and I said in 1971. Then I wrote a play called Fullerton Street, which was set 1940.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote My Rain's Black Bottom, which was set 1927. And it was then I said, oh, why don't I just continue to do this? And then I just, with no particular order, I had an idea for the 50s. I said, what are the 50s? And so I wrote Transfers, and then Joe Turner in like 1911.
Mm-hmm.
That just happened out of nowhere. I mean, I didn't even plan to write that. You know what I'm saying? And,
yeah. So Joe Turner might have been inspired by the fact that you're looking for a play within that specific decade?
No, that's not saying it was not.
Oh, okay.
That's the whole point. It was not. I didn't say, okay, now my 11's play.
Now your 40s play. Now yeah.
It's just an example of how these things happen is I had written Fences. I didn't have any play to write. I had from September to December to write a play for O'Neill, and I'm going to write a play, but I don't know what I'm going to write about. I don't care. It's not a problem. I'll write a play.
Yeah.
And at the restaurant I went to, there was a waitress, and she said, oh, I hear you're a writer. You want to write a story together. You write the first 4 pages, I'll write the next 4 pages. So trying to encourage her to write. I said, sure.
Oh, wow.
So I'm home, and it's Sunday, and I go, oh, man, I'm supposed to have these 4 pages for Ruth to learn. And there's a magazine that had a picture of Milham's lunch bucket, which was a painting by Romeo Bearden. So I said, oh, I know what I'll do. And I looked at the painting, and I began to write a short story as though I were a reviewer, or art critic of the New York Times, and I'm describing this painting. And I go describing on outside the windows the steel mill rages, and the man here and the woman there. And there's a man, I said, and the painter has placed, a figure seated in the middle of the painting in a posture of abject defeat. The man's name is Harold Loomis. You know, when I wrote that, how would a reviewer know what the man's name is? Sure. That blew me away. And I said, wow, what if... So I went back the next day, and I had 9 pages, actually. And I said, I'm sorry, but you can't work on this here, because they give you 9 pages, and I got to work on this myself. We'll do the 4 pages, later. Yeah. And I still went home, and I wrote 3 more pages to the story, and I caught myself. I said, wait a minute, man, you're a playwright now. You should make this into a play. And I immediately think about, man, how do you make this into a play? I said, you got to set up, and then I just... turned over the page and went setting and started right there. The first scene of Joe Turner. Look at the man out there and even who the characters were.
Yeah.
So they just.
I love that when the inspiration comes from the simplest thing. You see a magazine or you see a person.
And so the painting was set in early 1900s, not necessarily 1911, but it was, and that's how that got its setting. But I didn't. As I was saying, just say, oh, I'll write my 19.
Yeah.
Simmons College.
You mentioned 114th Avenue?
Fulton Street is a 40s, my 40s play, which I abandoned.
Okay, because that's not even enlisted among these. Jitney is, which I don't think LA's seen a production of that yet.
We had a production in Pittsburgh in 82 and St. Paul in 85, and Pittsburgh Public Theater is doing it this year as part of their season.
Oh, great.
And, so I'm looking forward to that.
Obviously, one day somebody's going to come up with the idea, hey, let's do them all in order and do a whole festival. And I mean, wouldn't that be amazing to see the progression,
Great idea.
And as you can imagine, by this stage, several companies have managed to mount all 10. If you're interested, the African American Theatre Studies postgraduate gang over in U of L's theatre have been slowly working their way through the works of Wilson, and I can't remember what they did most recently, but I know they're certainly on track towards getting through all of them. The trick would be to see if we could see all of them in the 1 month period. Maybe that's something for Actors Theatre to try. Anyway, I'm going to move on to Lynn Nottage now. We want to get bang up to date. This woman was born in 1964 in Brooklyn, and she's still alive. She's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. She's the only woman, African American or otherwise, to have won the Pulitzer Prize for drama twice. Her play Ruined won it in 2009, and the one most recently was Sweat. I'm going to talk about Sweat a little bit in a moment. You might be wondering, given that I'd said that the age of modernism in art was basically 1830 or thereabouts through to World War II. And I didn't really give any dates for theatre. And you might be wondering, wait, if like modern theatre or modern art finishes in around 1945, why are we talking about Lynn Nottage and the play that came out 3 years ago in that term? Well, it's more tricky to say than that. And I think this is a good point in time to talk about this concept. We like to draw these nice, neat little lines about this is the modern age. This is the age of enlightenment. This is that. Nice, smooth lines. And the reality is never that. Theatre's modern age begins much later. It begins about 40 years after the visual art one, which you could say, well, then maybe it goes on 40 years more, and then it goes on to 1980 or thereabouts. But that's not how it works. Right through to today, the picaresque works like that landscape or the realistic portraits continue to be painted. Are they any less of value? A little in some senses, but in reality, no. The value of the art is in the eyes of those who behold it. And this is why I'm always on at ye lot, to talk about your perspective and your thoughts about a piece of work, rather than, yeah, this critic said this and that critic said that. Whether or not something is en vogue or passé in the eyes of the major art world is irrelevant. It is ultimately the audience who decides the value of a piece of work. And bearing that in mind, you could argue various different things. But in different countries, modernism started later and went on longer. The United States hasn't moved on from modernism. Not that you have to move on. I say this as somebody who loves Shakespeare and Greek plays. Those old types still have a relevance if you can find the right audience for them. Modernism, in so many ways, the realism, the naturalism, it is reflected by television. And in that reflection, we see ourselves. It doesn't make it the best kind of theatre any more than it makes it out of date. But I like to use this as an opportunity to point out great examples of modern writing. And these, in Lynn Nottage, in August Wilson, in Lorraine Hansberry, are great examples of the modern theatrical style, or the modernist theatrical style. It's not gone out of fashion by any means. The vast majority of writing at the moment aspires to naturalism and realism. But few aspire as successfully as she does. And her works will be probably played, as will Wilson's, as will Hansberry's, in 100 to 200 to 300 years' time. As long as people feel as people are, good work will continue. And it will ignore these nice little packages of this is the period of symbolism, this is the period of that. The reality is, when surrealists were major and huge and at their peak, there weren't very many of them doing it. There's probably as much surrealist writing in the theatre today as there was in the 1930s when it was at its peak. There's probably more modernist writing going on today than there was in the 1870s. That's a discussion for another day. Lynn Nottage, probably the preeminent playwright in America at the moment, I would say. Again, winning the Pulitzer twice, incredibly significant. And what's interesting is she isn't necessarily writing that down-home folksy, this is who I am stuff that made so many American writers successful in this country. She's writing challenging theatre that forces us to engage and think about things. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Again, born in Brooklyn. I believe she's still living there. She is a playwright as well as a professor. The professor is the day job. Let us be honest. You do not make a lot of money as a playwright. You never really did. Shakespeare, he was an actor and a co-owner of the theatre. He did not make his money as a playwright. She was educated in Brown and then went on to Yale, won the Pulitzer twice, and is basically has somehow managed to turn herself into the most remarkable writers. She's written a number of plays, Intimate Apparel, Ruined, By the Way, Meet Vera Stark, and Sweat being probably the biggest ones at the moment. She's had a play out every year for the last 2 or 3 years, I think, which is quite impressive. A lot of the time when writers get older, their play output is reduced. Ruined was her first Pulitzer winner. It's a remarkable piece of work which is exploring the lives of women in the Congo. It follows a businesswoman who's trying to protect and profit from the women, protect women and also profit from them as she shelters them. This is about civil war, and I'd like to think that a number of you have some awareness of the Congolese civil wars over the years in the Democratic Republic, and with I can never remember what it's formally called. It was, the names have changed so much. What's now the Democratic Republic of Congo has been Katanga, and it has also been Zaire. But either way, she wrote this sensational play, which again confronts a lot of the violence against women. She's not writing this as an easy way of making money. She's writing this because she has something to say. She wants to bring light to dark places. She wants to get people talking and thinking. And this is a major thing with Lynn Nottage. She's a very gifted writer. She can write about pretty much whatever she wants. But as you read plays like Sweat, like Ruined, like Intimate Apparel, you're seeing an exploration of a world. It's not unsympathetic, but it often has unsympathetic characters in there. It's not giving us easy answers, and it's certainly not shying away from unpleasant material. This isn't, in some senses, she is the antithesis of Netflix. She is not willing to let us have a nice, easy, sum-upable thing. I'm sure some of you are watching that thing about that weirdo from Oklahoma. Even with their non-fiction stuff, a lot of Netflix stuff kind of condenses it into a nice story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A lot of her stories don't have one, and Sweat is one like that. It's looking at a group of people who are going through in real time, not in quite real time, going through the big crash of 2008. Now, what's interesting is she wrote this in 2014-15, and it feels really real to a modern world because it's set in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is I think it was the poorest small town of its size when they developed the play. When she developed the play, I should say. This play catches people who work alongside each other, and as things take a turn for the worse financially, issues to do with economic difficulty, race, outsiderism, all these kind of things come to the head, leading to a particularly violent act, which changes the world for some of the people in there. It doesn't happen in a linear fashion. We begin, if you like, 8 to 10 years later, where we're talking to people who have come back after this violence. And it goes back and forth, as we explore what happened to people who should be friends, who were friends, and how that was turned on a dime for them. The particularly distressing thing about this, particularly as it relates to race, is how it's all happening again, or has been happening again for the last few years, on an elevated level. This has been happening throughout the history of America. Don't think I don't know that. But with the resumption of resumption of race, of outwardly facing racism, and the further exploration of bias through the reorganization of some of the more white nationalist groups. This is a play that is very much for now, even though when she was writing it, it had been set 7 or 8 years previous. They brought the play. The play obviously opens in big professional theatres in relatively major spaces. It opened the Oregon Shakespeare. It was written for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and was performed there. It's travelled around. It was her Broadway debut, which is ridiculous for a woman who had already had a Pulitzer Prize winning play. But what's fascinating, and this is a trailer really for it, is her This Is Reading project, which is basically to take the play to Reading and explore it there. Have a look at this.
In 2011, I read an article in the New York Times which was discussing the fact that Reading, Pennsylvania was the poorest city of its size in all of America. And so we set our sights on trying to get to know the city from top to bottom. We interviewed everyone from the mayor, the police chief, educators, business people, homeless people. They felt that in one fell swoop, they went from being people who were solidly middle class to becoming part of the invisible class. People always answered the question, how would you describe your city? With the answer, Reading was. They always spoke of their city in past tense. How did a city, which had once been such an incredible industrial powerhouse, become a city without narrative? I wasn't sure whether the audience would be offended by some of the representations, but what we found is that people really felt that it was representative of the experience that they had.
We've been having the same conversation for 20 years. Butts is a bitch. Olstead sucks. But it's work. So let's stop complaining and have some fun!
It was really important to us to be in dialogue with the folks who were really at the center of the creation of this piece.
A lot of us get to a certain point in our lives, and sometimes we don't always have a lot to show for that. Because all we have to give is that particular thing that is our 8, 10 hours, whatever, a labor at something that puts food on our table, gives us a sense of identity. And I just wanted to thank you for acknowledging the importance of everybody getting up and going about their day and doing something meaningful.
You keeping yourself busy?
Trying. Walking the line in the morning, working the phones in the afternoon. Nothing yet. Unions offering money for folks to go back to school. But I never liked school, so I'm taking what little support they give until I can find something to pay the bills.
Coming to Reading, one of the things that I experienced is that this is a very divided community. It's fractured along racial lines and economic lines, and that a lot of folks are not in dialogue with each other. And what I hope is that everyone recognize the ways in which we're connected rather than the ways in which we're different.
People come in here every day. They brush by me without seeing me. No, hello, Oscar. If they don't see me, then I don't need to see them.
Sitting with the audience in Reading, it really felt like a sacred space. We have hit upon something that's quite special and quite important, and I think is at the core of why we continue to make theater. We make theater to create the opportunity for people to sort of reflect back on the culture and to create these sacred experiences in which people can have that catharsis and have that release, and where they can do it collectively with audiences.
Sweat hasn't been done in Louisville. Fences has. I've lit Fences in Louisville. I've seen what's the name of the play at all? Raisin in the Sun here in Louisville. But Sweat hasn't been done yet. I know there are more than one theatre company has considered it. I'm hoping it will happen sooner rather than later. I don't think any of her works have been done here. But that's not because of there being some problem here. There's an interesting thing. Her plays are big plays, big themes, and you should not be just casually jumping at it. If you look at Actors Theatre, they have a very close relationship with Dominique Morisseau, who is also an African-American writer who's been producing another body of work that is worth looking at. And again, if they have a Morisseau play on in Actors, do go. They're going to do as good a job on it as anybody in this country is going to do. We do find that a little bit, particularly, unfortunately, still, with the major professional theatre companies. They will often develop a relationship with a writer or a producer or director of colour, and they'll work very hard and develop that relationship, but it'll be that relationship. So I feel in some ways, and this is a personal view, sorry Actors Theatre fans who are critiquing me, I'm terrible, you know that. But I do feel very strongly that Actors Theatre, while championing Morrisou's work, and that's a good thing, she's been this is this year's black play. Now, I think with the new artistic director stepping in, this should hopefully change. But the attitude of, this is this year's black play, can we be beyond that at this stage? Really, it's a professional theatre that is meant to represent all of Louisville. Let's represent all of Louisville out for having a play outside of Black History Month, which is what had been the case. And the new artistic director has, it appears, set that in motion. Fingers crossed it'll keep going that way for years to come. Thanks for joining me. The next day I'm going to be talking about contemporary works and contemporary type theatre, which is a massively broad church. And then Wednesday next week, instead of a second video next week, we're going to do a Zoom chat about experimental theatre. Right, thanks a million. Hope some of this helps. Hope some of this is interesting. I will talk to you next week.